Yank Tank flattens Pressbury. I suspect that last year some corporate bigwig at General Motors was given an atlas for Christmas. And I suppose it must have been quite a shock for the poor chap to find that his teachers, the newspapers and the television news had all been lying. Imagine, for 50 years he had known without any doubt that God was called Hank and that the world stopped at LA. He knew the Americans had tried without success to find new civilizations. The launch pad at Cape Canaveral was proof of that. But here on his lap was this atlas, a book which spoke of strange and exotic new places where people breathed air and had central heating and Corby trouser presses and, yes, even cars. Back at work after the Christmas break, he would have been treated as something of a lunatic as he rushed around telling his colleagues that there were life forms outside the USA. What, in the ocean you mean? Fish, whales, sea cucumbers? No, there are bipeds in places like Japan and South Africa and the United Britain. And we can sell them cars. All we need do is put the steering wheel on the other side. We'll be rich. And this did it, because now there's an armada of General Motors heading for the UK. There's the Chevrolet Camaro, the big four-wheel drive Blazer, the Corvette, and most amazingly of all, the £40,000 Cadillac Seville STS. Oh dear, I appear to have put Pressbury into a state of cataclysmic shock. For years, people in the neo-Georgian suburbs of Manchester have been on the lookout for something a little more vulgar and ostentatious than a Rolls-Royce, and now it's coming. Not since Parker Knoll brought out their last recliner has Cheshire been in quite such a heightened state of expectation. The people there need to know what this new car is like. Well now, I drove a Cadillac Seville last year and it was simply incredible. You could stop, get out, go shopping, have dinner, and when you got back to the car 3 hours later, it would still be rocking back and forth. It may have looked a little more restrained than the finned, chromed monsters from the late 50s, but it was still as soft as a puppy with the directional control of Bambi. In Arizona it was, of course, very comfortable, but for trips into Wilmslow it would have been utterly hopeless. Cadillac, however, has not only moved the steering wheel, but they've also changed the suspension. Indeed, I drove one this week and can report it doesn't really have any. They've noted that while American footballers take to the field in an all-over body tampon, rugby players protect their bones with nothing more than a shirt. So they obviously figure we don't need springs or dampers, just 4 bloody great RSJs. And the He-Man steering is so macho, the wheel has a full beard. There is, however, terrible disappointment elsewhere in the interior. Cheshire, I'm sure, was hoping for pearlescent Vulgalore upholstery, Las Vegas lighting and button-backed white carpets. But no, you get black leather and exactly the same sort of wood they used on Garrard turntables from 1975. You don't even get a backlit gold Cadillac motif in the middle of the steering wheel. But do not think for 1 minute that this is a low-key sports saloon like the BMW 5 Series. It has front-wheel drive for a start, and the automatic gearbox works in geological time. Put your foot down and several eons will slide by before it kicks down. And nor is it an executive cruiser. First of all, it is stupidly noisy thanks to absurd tyre roar, and second, the driver's seat is modelled on an electric chair. It features a device called Auto Lumbar Support, which moves in tandem with your body. Unfortunately, it was designed to support the average American back, which is a task every bit as difficult as propping up the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I suspect that slender, lettuce-fed Pressbury backs will tire very quickly of being asked to rest on what is basically a piece of heavy engineering. But you will never tire of the engine. The 4.6-litre V8 produces 300 horsepower, and that's enough, despite the best efforts of the Darwinian gearbox, to get the Seville from 0 to 60 in 6.8 seconds and on to 150. Apparently 19 miles to the gallon should also be possible, and it is, if you're towed everywhere. So what's the big deal then? Well, not only does it sound utterly wonderful at high revs, but it only needs servicing once every 100,000 miles. And thanks to clever cylinder management, it can even run for 50 miles with no oil or water. This will be a boon to the mink coat and no knickers set, who are forever laughing over a lettuce lunch about how that morning they filled up the washer bottle with diesel. An amazing engine, however, isn't enough. If only they'd sent the Seville here with Pleblon seats and Fablon decals down the side, Pressbury would have gone, to coin a phrase, mad for it. But instead they've toned it down, hoping to pick up a few BMW and Jaguar drivers. And they failed on that one too, because the Seville just isn't good enough. It was a brave effort from our man with the Atlas, but then it was a brave effort too the last time an American picked up a map of the world. And the army got sent to Vietnam. Bedtime Stories with Hans Christian Prescott. I have a dream. I see a world with happy, rosy-cheeked children scrumping apples. When you ring to book a seat at the cinema, you will talk not to a machine, but to Ma Larkin. And there will be an interval in the film where you eat pork pies and fudge. No one will have a mobile phone that plays the grand old Duke of York, and Bernard Cribbins will run your local railway station. Estuary English will be spoken only in the Thames estuary, which, incidentally, will be full of cormorants, and no one will die of anything. Now, I could publish this in a white paper, but you'd all laugh. You'd know that the Thames estuary children would shoot all the cormorants. Well, it's much the same deal with the vision of Britain outlined this week by Mr. Prescott in his much-talked-about white paper. I've read every one of the 160 pages, and it's fantastic. No one could possibly argue with any one of the fat man's dreams, but sadly, that's what they are. Dreams. Take point 510. It says, "We need to improve the image of the bus if we are to attract people who are used to the style and comfort of modern cars." And it goes on to say that the bus industry must respond to the challenge with a vehicle designed for the 21st century. Right, chaps. Well, if you want me out of the car and in one of your buses by 2000, you've got 18 months to come up with a vehicle that can do this. Yesterday, while making a white sauce, I found I needed some more milk and had to get to and from the shop in less than 3 minutes. I shall need a service that can handle this. This afternoon, my mother is coming to Oxfordshire from Peterborough with 2 small children and their nanny. They don't want to go via 2 train stations in London, so if this new public transport is going to be as convenient as the car, there must be a bus service from CASSETTE to Chipping Norton 30 times a day. And on board the bus, I want electric Recaro seats finished in the finest hide, I want TV, I want air conditioning, and I must be able to play whatever music I wish without disturbing any of the other passengers. Also, there must be a screen, such as you would find in the first-class section of a British Airways 777, so that I can pick my nose without being overlooked. I shall also wish to smoke. The bus must also be eco-friendly, so obviously a diesel engine is out of the question. Gas might be an answer, but a big V8 is better. Certainly I shall be looking for 0 to 60 in less than 10 seconds and a top speed of 150 or so, and it must be designed by Pininfarina. OK? Got all that? Well, it gets worse because the service, I'm afraid, has to be free. You see, Mr. Prescott has said it's all right for me to have a car, but that I must leave it at home more often. Fine. But I'll have paid for it, and road tax is applicable no matter how infrequently I use it. I therefore can't afford to spend even more money on a bus fare. To address this, the white paper says that I will have to pay to use motorways, and that I will be charged if I drive into a city centre. I see, and how will this be done then? Will there be toll booths on every single road into London, all 10,000 of them? Or will I be forced to fit my car with an electronic device that can be read by roadside monitors? And if so, who will pay for this device to be fitted? Sadly, the white paper fails to explain this in the same way that Enid Blyton fails to explain how Noddy, a wooden puppet, manages to converse with an elephant. Undaunted, Mr. Prescott goes on to say that by charging tolls to use the roads and taxing car parking spaces, super-efficient, dream-world local authorities will be able to raise £1 billion a year. They won't lose it. They won't waste it on twinning ceremonies. They'll spend it on public transport. Oh dear, I'm afraid that in Mr. Prescott's world, where everyone drinks Ovaltine and Jenny Agutter is 13, £1 billion is a lot of money. But in fact, a new double-decker costs £130,000, and as a result, $1 billion won't even buy one for each town in the country. The chances, therefore, of getting a service from CASSETTE to Chipping Norton 30 times a day are, I'm afraid, somewhat remote. But that's not the end of the world. You see, if car travel were as bad as everyone says, no one would do it. And things are going to get better and better. Already we have the same number of cars on the roads as we do people with driving licences, so unless we perfect the art of driving 2 cars at once, the projected 30% increase in traffic volume just can't happen. In fact, as people start to work at home more often, it'll probably decrease slightly. I do, however, think that Mr. Prescott's white paper has a place. If it were illustrated with attractive drawings, it might even supersede Thomas the Tank Engine as my 4-year-old daughter's favourite nighttime story. Jag sinks its teeth in. So, what's been happening this week then? Well, I've been to Saint-Tropez for a little break, but as I rented a diesel-powered Citroën people carrier, it's hard to think of a motoring angle. What else? Oh, I know. While screaming down a test track in Wiltshire on Tuesday, I crashed a 215-mile-an-hour, £750,000 Jaguar XJR 15. And I suppose that with a bit of hyperbole here and a small embellishment there, this is quite good column material. I'd been warned about this remarkable supercar before I ever squeezed my haddock-sized frame into that sardine tin they call a cockpit. Derek Warwick, the former Grand Prix driver, was very unkind about its waywardness, and my colleague Tiffany Dell called it the worst handling car ever made. It seems that though it was conceived as a road-going Le Mans car that was turned back into a racing car again, the engine is located so far from the ground that it's a menace to orbiting satellites. So the car has its centre of gravity in the clouds, and to make matters worse, no downforce at all. And that in a car of this type is as bad as having an aeroplane with no lift. This, I'm sure, was a big concern for the boys who raced them, but I was at Kemble Airfield, surrounded by mile upon mile of runway. I hit the starter, and behind a wafer-thin firewall, a 6-litre V12 engine exploded into life. It's so noisy that it kills all known wildlife within a 50-mile radius, even worms. And at full chat it rocks the needles on seismographs in California. Completely deaf, I started to grapple with the gear lever, which, though this is a right-hand drive car, was located by my right knee. Move it a millimetre to the left and you're in first. 1.1 millimetres and you're in reverse. This makes changing gear a more exact science than splitting the atom. And then there's the clutch. Equipped with the sort of spring that they use on oil rig platforms, there is nothing for the first 9 inches of travel, and then, just when you think you're still in neutral, drive is fired at the back wheels and you're doing 80 miles an hour. Backwards sometimes, if you got the wrong gear. I was really very scared, even though I knew there was nothing to hit except the camera car. But you can't hit a great big blue Mondeo, which is always travelling in the same direction as you are, at the same speed. I did, though. After a 15-minute bottom-sniffing getting-to-know-you period, I made sure the XJR was pointing in a dead straight line and, in second gear at 50 miles an hour, floored the throttle. On the streaming wet runway, the car started to slide, but it was hard in the cockpit to detect this loss of traction, this imperceptible drift to the left. So I kept my foot hard down and didn't really start to dial in some opposite lock until it was far too late. The back flicked the other way and bang! My front corner slammed into the camera car, the only solid object within 40 miles. Damage to the Jaguar was remarkably light, but its owner pointed out that even a 4-inch crease in a double-skinned piece of honeycombed carbon fibre cannot be knocked back into shape by an apprentice mechanic. It needed a whole new front end, and guess what? Halfords don't sell nose sections for the Jaguar XJR 15. No one does. Only 30 were ever made, and after 11 were crashed in one race alone, There are no spare parts left. Had I been equipped with a tail at this point, I'd have put it between my legs and run off into the bushes, where I would have beaten myself with twigs. But then the owner said he'd use a bit of filler, and all would be well. Filler in a £750,000 car. That's like using Humbrol to touch up the hay wain. Still, I am now officially a bad workman, so I'm allowed to blame my tool. The XJR-15 may be one of the most beautiful cars ever to see the light of day, but it is bloody dangerous. And there's nothing to stop you taking this automotive psychopath onto the road, for heaven's sake. I read recently that the area of contact between the four tyres on a car and the road would fit on a piece of A4 paper. So it isn't so much the skill you need to handle a car like the XJR-15, but the temperament. You must be aware that if the road is even slightly greasy, you cannot apply full power or the tyres will lose traction and you will crash. In an ordinary car, you can mash the throttle into the carpet whenever you like, but in a 200-mile-an-hour hypercar, you have to employ the restraint of a saint. You must feed the power in gently, let the clutch in slowly, turn the wheel carefully. Basically, if you have a Jaguar XJR-15 or a Ferrari F50 or a McLaren F1, you must drive slowly. This, I know, is a bit like going to the best restaurant in town and ordering beans on toast, but that's the way it is. If you want to drive around like your hair's on fire, rent yourself a diesel-powered people carrier. I did, and I never crashed once. Minicabs, the full Monty. Book yourself in for an operation and you'll have no idea who'll be wielding the knife, but you'll know with absolute certainty that he'll have a raft of qualifications and no history of muscular spasms. It's the same with restaurants. You may have no clue about who is preparing your food, but it's a fair bet he'll understand that you can't put Tabasco sauce on sherry trifle. And yet, when you want a taxi, you'll summon the services of a minicab, which may or may not have brakes. And it will be steered by a man who may or may not have learned to drive in Peru. One thing is for sure, though, he won't come to your door and ring on the bell. What he will do is pull up in the middle of the road and lean on his horn, signalling that it's time for you to stop whatever you're doing and run outside. This is unfair. He may have taken 5 hours to get there, and in the meantime you may have met the girl of your dreams. Or you may be my wife, who, having said goodbye to everyone at a party, will sit down again and give everyone a blow-by-blow account of her life. Whatever. You will climb into the back of the cab, whereupon you will be overcome with a wave of nausea. Can I smoke, you'll ask, to which the answer will be no, on the grounds that tobacco leaves a lingering odour, thus making the car harder to sell. What? Tobacco would improve things. A giant fart would improve things. Smearing the entrails of a dead dog into the seats would improve things. Minicabs have a smell all of their own, a smell that could not possibly be replicated even in a laboratory. It's a smell that doesn't even exist in a businessman's pants. It's not stale sick or even the driver's shirt, and nor is it a mixture of the two. No, it's the smell you get from those Christmas tree air fresheners. And it's obscene. To take my mind off the problem, I usually try to guess what sort of car I'm in. Obviously it will have beige Pleblon seats, and obviously it will have been made in the Far East. But is it a Toyota, or is it a Nissan? I can understand why minicab drivers buy used Jap boxes. They're reliable and cheap to run. But who buys these cars when they're new? And why do they treat them so badly? By the time Minicab Man is falling in love down at the auction, the wheels are always square, and if you look hard, you'll note that whenever you're going along in a straight line, the driver is having to turn left. And what's that noise coming from the stereo? Why is it that minicab drivers listen to radio stations I've never even heard of? And how can they appreciate the wailing of the sitar when the controller back at base never shuts up? I was once picked up by the fattest man in the world in an FSO Polonaise, which broke down in the tunnel at Heathrow Airport. And do you know something? I was glad. You see, his driving was incredible. I think he'd been to see Star Wars and genuinely thought he could use the Force to miss oncoming traffic. As we shot through the 18th red light, I really was expecting him to turn round and ask me in a rasping voice about the plans for the rebel base. He even called me young Luke. He was the worst driver in Britain, a complete madman, and he was in a car which had started out badly and had grown worse with age. This is a terrible combination, and as I lugged my suitcases into the daylight from that tunnel, I swore I'd use a better class of minicab from that point on. And I do. The firms I call today can field brand new people carriers and stretched Merc limos. The prices reflect this, but sadly the driving doesn't. One bloke the other day swore vehemently at every other driver on the road, saving the real torrent for anyone who actually carved him up. When one bloke failed to let him out of a side turning, my man began a stream of abuse which continued without repetition or hesitation for 3 minutes. And when he ran out of suitable English phrases and expressions, he switched to Turkish. It was both breathtaking and useful, should I ever find myself in Ankara. I should have used this abuse technique the other night on a driver who had never heard of Fulham or a guy a couple of weeks ago who obviously believed that his Fiat Chroma could, given a long enough run-up, beat Richard Noble's land speed record. Now obviously at this point every licensed Archie is sitting at home beating his children with a rolled-up copy of the Style section, telling anyone who'll listen that I should use black cabs. This is true, but unfortunately he will still be sitting there shouting when I next need some wheels. So we'll all keep on using minicabs. Just beware though. If you find yourself sitting behind a bloke who answers to the name of Darth, get out and run for your life. He's easy to spot because he has a long black cape, a black helmet, and terrible asthma. Supercar crash in stock exchange. As I look out of the window today, I can see the storm clouds gathering. Mr. Blair will be torn from his mountings and the Met Bar will be forced to introduce an all-night happy hour. The dome will be cast into the North Sea and Rotherham will be wiped from the map. The brief sprouting of industry in Corby will be erased and EasyJet will crash. Be in absolutely no doubt on this one. Recession Tony is on its way. Now, I think it wise at this point to explain that I have never read the Financial Times. Also, I achieved an unclassified grade in my economics A-level, partly because I forgot to turn up for the exam and partly because I forgot to turn up for any of the lessons either. I have tried to understand the implications of handing over interest rate control to the Bank of England, but every time I think I've grasped it, I fall into a deep and dreamless sleep. And I'm sorry, but I really cannot work out why the Brazilian balance of payments deficit will make me less likely to buy a cauliflower. I write this column, Rupert Murdoch gives me some of his money, I spend it, and I'm sorry, but you can wipe as much as you like off the Japanese stock market, but it won't make the slightest difference. No, don't argue, it won't. Nevertheless, I am able to predict the onset of a financial holocaust because the world's car firms are getting cocky again. Remember what happened last time? They reacted quite late to the mid-80s boom and began work on a series of new and frighteningly expensive cars which crept onto the market at exactly the same time as Recession John started to blow things over in EC4. Jaguar were left with an unwanted stock of XJ220s. McLaren only managed to shift 47 of their preposterous F1s. Bugatti went to the bottom of the Tiber wearing lead pants, and Lamborghini ended up being run by a Malaysian pop star. I don't doubt for 1 minute that after the debacle of '92, every single car exec in the world declared that he would never again be tempted to make a megabucks supercar. But when the world is bathing in greenbacks, it's hard to resist, and already word is starting to creep out that the car execs have relented. I read in this newspaper that Mercedes and McLaren are planning to make a £150,000 supercar, but as it was in the business section, I lost the plot after that. I do understand, however, that Maserati is back in business with a new coupe and that Audi has bought Lamborghini, who are known to be working on a new 1-ounce, 1 million horsepower Dreammobile. This will force Ferrari to fight back with something so light it'll need mooring ropes. And then there's Jaguar, who, at the Paris Motor Show this week, will unveil a car called the XK180. It is propelled by a supercharged V8 engine, which is said to develop nearly 450 brake horsepower. And for those of you who understand, 445 pound-feet of torque. I can't even begin to guess how fast it will go, but as the two-door convertible body is made entirely from aluminium, obviously it should be able to outrun a Nissan Micra. I can tell you, however, that I've seen this spiritual successor to the D-Type, and it is quite simply the most beautiful car ever made. Remarkable when you discover it was designed on the back of a cigarette packet. Last December, Jaguar decided to mark the 50th anniversary of the XK range and talked about turning the supercharged XK8 into more of a driver's car, perhaps shortening it a bit and taking out some of the Houston dentistry in the suspension. Work began in February. On Saturday mornings, a group of die-hard petrol heads could be found ferreting away in what has now become known as the Special Vehicle Operation. They went by instinct, deciding quite late on to make the panels from aluminium, and then even later that if they were using a new material, they may as well have a new look too. It's this sort of ingenuity, remember, which gave us the jet engine and the hovercraft, and now it's given us the XK180. It doesn't work, of course. Well, no, that's not true. It does work, but thanks to all sorts of Euro busybodyery, they could never actually sell one. However, at the show in Paris, they will be bombarded with requests to turn this D-Type dream into a production reality, and it'll be almost impossible to resist. I'm sure they'll make it, and I'm sure, too, that the day they choose to launch it with a price tag of, £150,000, will be the same day that the National Lottery goes bust, and no one will buy a car that costs 4 times more than a large and sumptuous house. Fairly soon now, the car industry must learn to get itself in step with the economy. As soon as the 14th floor windowsills in the city are full of men in suits crying, they should start to work on a high-price, low-volume supercar. That way the car would be ready to go on sale just after the economy has recovered. And that really is the key. The economy always does recover because we'll always want cauliflowers and we'll always want cars that go like stink. Galbraith? It's my middle name. The school run. I remember with vivid clarity the moment when I began to grow up. I was 22 years old, standing in a hardware shop, asking the assistant if I could buy a washing-up bowl. Until that point, I'd spent my money on beer, cigarettes, rent, and begrudgingly the occasional Christmas present. Never before had I wasted it on something useful. I remember driving home, staring at the bowl, knowing with crushing certainty that pretty soon I'd be out there buying light bulbs and white goods, things from which I would derive no pleasure whatsoever. 15 years later, stage 2 was reached, and I retuned my car stereo to Radio 2, and then this week I reached stage 3. I did the school run. And from now on there is no chance of enjoying an impromptu night out with friends, lest it become a hazy stumble into the early hours. You can't go to bed at 4 in the morning when you have to be sober and hearty just 3 hours later. And let me tell you this, buying a washing-up bowl was dull, turning to Radio 2 was inevitable, but the school run is hell on earth because it removes the last vestige of fun from the concept of motoring. It turns a car from the thrusting symbol of virility into a tool that goes head-to-head with a washing-up bowl, and loses. For a kick-off, I have to forget all about Terry Wogan. Instead, I'm forced to listen over and over to Aqua's Barbie song, which lines up alongside the 1812 Overture as the least appropriate morning music ever written. Should I ever meet this Swedish band, I promise you this, I will kill them. And then there's my son, who, at the age of 2, can identify every single car on the road. On its own, this would be a source of pride, but what turns it into something less savoury is the fact that he does identify every single car on the road. We have to drive along with a Swede telling me that life in plastic is fantastic, while the boy child shouts out the name of every car going the other way. He can't say good morning, but seems to have no problem with Daihatsu. Obviously, I'd like to get the journey over with as quickly as the Mondeo's V6 engine will go, but there's a pressure valve built into every parent which activates as soon as children climb into the back of a car. Suddenly, I lose the ability to overtake. I may be stuck behind a tractor, and the road may be clear for 200 miles, but I am incapable of dropping a cog and going for it. When I'm driving with the children, I become exactly the sort of person I shout at. There's another issue too. You daren't overtake the car in front in case it turns out to be another parent taking their children to the same school. You'd be classified as a maniac and your children would be bullied. So we all drive along at 2, each of us being bombarded with aqua until we arrive at the maelstrom itself, the school gate. And at this point, the gene which controls manners and common sense is simply switched off. You stop the car wherever it is physically possible to do so, not caring two hoots that you happen to be in a bus lane or blocking in someone else who is very obviously just about to leave. You want those children out of your car now, and frankly you will use battery electrodes and skewers on anyone who dares to get in your way. And once the children are in the classroom, the craving for adult conversation becomes impossible to resist. You're desperate to talk to someone who can say more than plastic, fantastic, Suzuki, Rover and BMW. So you'll talk to anyone, completely forgetting that your car is in the middle of the road with 3 of its doors wide open. In his ill-fated white paper, John Prescott declared war on the twice-daily school run as perhaps the major cause of traffic congestion in our cities today. And he's right. I know he's trying to do us a favour. He's been there, though in his day it was probably the Birdie Song and Agadoo rather than Barbie, and he wants to save the rest of us from the horror. It's a nice thought, John, but the simple fact of the matter is this. I cannot put a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old on a bus. For one very good reason. Round here, there isn't one. And I'm loath to fix up an organised rota either. I don't want to sound twee here, but it seems silly to entrust the 2 most valuable things in my life to someone who, for all I know, isn't a very good driver. Some people aren't, you know. They get the clutch and the rearview mirror muddled up, even when they're on their own. And it gets worse when they have a people carrier full of chanting 4-year-olds. And you can't very well say to a parent who's offering to take your children to school, yes, but first of all, let's see how you handle power oversteer. I'm afraid, therefore, I'm on the school run right up to the moment when life reaches stage 4, and I start gardening. Van the Man. On the face of it, motoring in India could not be easier. The highway code states simply that might is right and that you must give way to anything which is larger. At all intersections, the lorry is king, and then, in descending order, you have the bus, the van, the elephant, the car, the auto-rickshaw, and finally, the mushy and pliable pedestrian. So why, if there is only one very simple rule, do the Indians kill 160 people on their roads every day? Well, first of all, we must face up to the simple problem that Indians can't drive. Think about it. The world of Formula One is hardly littered with names from the subcontinent, and no Indian has ever won the RAC rally. And then we have the question of religion. A majority of Indians believe that their death is preordained and that they can do nothing about it. So they arrive at the intersection knowing full well that they should give way to the truck, but they don't know which of the 3 pedals is the brake, and they don't really care about the consequences anyway. It's a dangerous mix, and that's before we get to the wild card, the 4-legged 2 of clubs. If you encounter a cow, you must swerve onto the wrong side of the road, irrespective of what is coming the other way, whether it's a school bus, some nuns, or Buzz Aldrin on a tractor. Elsewhere in the world, this would not be a big problem because cows tend to be kept in fields. But in India, you round a bend on their equivalent of the M6 and oh no, right there in front of you is Ermintrude enjoying a round of gin rummy with Daisy. Be aware then that if you're planning to drive in India, you may not listen to the radio or chat with your passengers. If you lose concentration for a split second, your head bone will become connected to your windscreen bone. It's all so very different in Britain, but remember, we also have a wild card. White Van Man. He is our equivalent of the sacred cow. He should be in a field with a ring in his nose, but he isn't. He's on the road with a ring in his eyebrow. Now, a report out this week tries to defend the man in a van, saying that he is courteous to other road users, that he is likely to have a pet, and that he is the first to get out of the way should an ambulance want to come past. Of course he is. That way he can tuck in behind the paramedics and get home even faster. The whole point of this survey, paid for by Renault, is to demonstrate that there is no such thing as White Van Man, and that people who drive trannies for a living are as demographically disparate as the nation as a whole. I see. So how come then that 40% of van drivers questioned said they had a satellite dish and that 28% take the sun? Only 4% do any gardening, and here's a good one, only 4% are women. What we're dealing with here are young men who like football, beer, curry tours of Corfu, and films where people get chopped up. And I'm sorry, but I don't subscribe to the report's findings, which say that White Van Man drives fast because his boss has set an impossible schedule. White Van Man drives fast because his boss will pay for repairs when he crashes. That's why they never change gear until the valves are coming through the bonnet. That's why they lunge about with their front bumper in the small of your back. And that's why they treat red traffic lights as advisory stop signals. The report suggests we all try driving a white van once in a while to see what it's like. Well, I have, and I'll tell you. It's great! You're big enough to mix it with the trucks, but nimble enough to get out of their way when the going gets rough. You can go head-to-head with taxi drivers and win. And as for drivers in their precious shiny cars, they're not people, they're targets. You can send White Van Man on as many driving courses as you like. You can attach a How's My Driving sticker to his rear bumper. And you can fit wirelesses which only play Sade's Smooth Operator, but it won't make the slightest bit of difference. Like the Indian cow, White Van Man is immune to all forms of assault. You can carve him up and he'll hit you. You can brake test him and he'll ram you up the backside. You can get out and remonstrate, but then you'll find the back is full of navvies who will practice the ancient art of origami on your arms and legs. The solution is obvious. Week in and week out I tell you about the new whiz-bang GTI, which will get from 0 to 60 in 1 second. But I appear to have been missing the point. If you really want to get around quickly, become an urban terrorist. Rent yourself a Ford Transit. And if a market researcher asks any questions, do everyone a favour and set the record straight. You like beating people up, preferably with chips. What I actually meant was... Right. Think back now to the most embarrassing thing you've ever done in your whole life. Maybe it was the porn mag you shoplifted when you were 11, or maybe it was the one-night stand you had last month with your bank manager. Come on, feel the guilt, squirm. And now imagine what it would be like to suffer from that feeling every single morning. Here's the problem. I get a car to test for a week usually, and in that time I'm able to work out almost nothing. Oh, sure, I can tell you how fast it goes and what it looks like. I'm even able to determine if it's noisy. But in actual fact, none of this stuff really matters. Take the Ford Puma, for instance. Having been bowled over by the styling, the performance and the promise of low Ford-style running costs, we made it the Top Gear Car of the Year. And, impressed by our report on the programme, a friend of mine bought one. And over dinner last week he shoved his finger right up my nose and explained that if you lift the tailgate up when it's raining, several gallons of water pour into the boot. I never spotted this because when I tested the car it was dry. But in the big scheme of things, it's not the end of the world. What concerns me far more is that I can't report on the one area that really, really matters: reliability. In the last series, I decided that the new Alfa Romeo GTV was the best coupe you could buy. It was pretty much the fastest, and though looks are subjective, I'll come round to your house with a broken bottle if you disagree that this mini Ferrari is a supermodel in a sea of excrement. Now, I knew it would not be reliable. I knew that after 6 months, if I pressed the electric window switch, the boot would have opened, and that if I'd mashed the throttle into the carpet, the bonnet would have flown away. I knew all of this, but I had no proof, so I couldn't say it. And as a result, Dr. Lynch of Belfast bought one, and now he's written to say that it's the most unreliable piece of donkey-do ever to grace the Emerald Isle. In 9 months, the car has been off the road for 8 weeks, and I told him to buy one. Oh my God, the guilt, the angst! And what's this? The next morning I got a letter from Simon Saunders, who, following my report, has a Land Rover Freelander. It arrived with the speedo calibrated in kilometres, and over the summer the speaker fell out of the door, the transmission began to rattle, it ate oil like a school boiler, and the air conditioning began to think it was a shower, hosing water into the cabin. Sadly, it hasn't actually broken down, so technically speaking, under the terms of my agreement with the MD of Rover, Dr. Hasselkuss, Simon is not allowed to burn anyone's house down. But he is cheesed off. And so is Andy Jones, because he bought a Volvo T5R, which received the Clarkson small boy in a toy shop treatment on TV. I loved it. I raved about it. Andy bought one, and to list all the faults, he used up all the paper in my fax machine. My hair stood on end as I digested the litany of problems. Oh God, the CD stopped working. Pass the razor. Oh no, it judders. Where are the Disprin? And then this morning I really did reach for the carving knife. A driving instructor wrote to say that in the last 4 years he has covered 130,000 miles in his Nissan Micra. It's been subjected to the worst kind of brutality from Maureen and her ilk, and apart from regular servicing, it's only needed 2 new brake pads. A Nissan bloody Micra, for heaven's sake. I hate the Nissan Micra. I've joked about this lump of Japanese junk for years. It's as sensible as a sandal with as much flair as Johnny Rotten's trousers. Yet it works every single day without fail. There's only one solution. Treat what I say about cars as entertainment, but under no circumstances actually go and buy anything that I like. Seriously, the guilt is killing me. Every morning, Postman Pat delivers another tale of woe from some poor sod who wanted that 150-mile-an-hour top speed. He wanted to generate 2G on every roundabout, and now the car is sitting in a workshop with oil spewing out of its heater vents. Please, don't write to me anymore. Please. Write to Quentin. It's all his fault. Kristen Scott Thomas in bed with the highway code. Now that cruise missiles and the environment have gone away, we have something new to worry about. The police, it seems, have become racist, and every night hundreds of black people die in the back of their vans. A report in the Sunday Times last week showed that nearly 16% of people entering the legal profession and 23% of those at medical school are black. But even here in society's stratosphere, they're not safe from constant police harassment. Plod apparently is forever barging into surgeries to look up Dr. Ngomo's bottom. So what's brought this on? Why have the heroes from an Enid Blyton world of rosy cheeks and apple scrumpers become a bunch of salivating Nazis, proven guilty of institutionalised racism? I suspect it's because they're bored. For 30 years, the police have had a purpose, a goal in life, a reason for being. They were employed solely to stamp out drinking and driving. They didn't investigate the Stephen Lawrence murder properly because all the available manpower was cruising the streets, looking for people who'd had a glass of sherry. But now the war on drink driving, as I've said many times, has been won. Britain is the safest country in Europe in which to drive. Only 14% of fatalities are drink-related, and most of those, as I've said before as well, are drunken pedestrians wandering into the path of perfectly sober drivers. Now, you don't need to be a psychiatrist to explain what happens when all of a sudden your role in life is removed. The issue was addressed in the Full Monty. You go a little bit bonkers. Some people take off all their clothes, others roam the street at night, beating people black and blue. Well, blue anyway. I was saddened, but not in the least surprised to see that Channel 4 newsreader Sheena MacDonald was run over by a police van last weekend. The driver probably mistook her for Trevor MacDonald. What the police need is a new target, and now they've got one: the mobile telephone. Last year, a government-funded study showed that making a call while on the move is as much of a safety risk as driving while drunk. And now the latest edition of the Highway Code tells drivers that phoning and driving is a no-no. In Canada, research has shown that drivers who make a call while at the wheel are 4 times as likely to have a crash, and that hands-free sets are just as lethal. Talking on the phone, they say, means you're not concentrating on your driving. So what about talking to passengers? Well, according to our highway code, that's fine, but you must not argue with them. Even if they say the age of consent should be lowered to 4, you must bite your lip or you will wind up in court, charged with driving without due care and attention. The code also says you must not eat or drink either, and it warns that navigation systems, onboard computers and even stereos can prove to be a distraction. Crikey, who'd have believed it? Listening to Terry Wogan is now illegal. For the country's black people, this is fantastic news. It means the police can get back in their powerful patrol cars and do what they do best: harass motorists. They'll need expensive directional microphones, of course, and persistent offenders, I imagine, will have their cars bugged. Hidden cameras will be used to catch those using satellite navigation systems or eating a Twix, and that's just the start. The new highway code also says you should not drive for an hour or more if you're feeling tired, and that a break of 15 minutes every 2 hours is advised. So how are they going to enforce this one then? Sir, we've been following you around all day. You had a breakfast meeting at 8, followed by a conference with the world's terrorists at 10. At lunchtime, you had frantic sex with your secretary and a goat. And in the afternoon, you robbed a bank and 2 post offices. And you've been driving now for 121 minutes without a break. You're nicked. This is ridiculous. When I took my driving test, the highway code was full of sensible advice. It told me to indicate before turning and not to cross level crossings when a train was coming. It lived in the real world, but now it can't even get the braking distances right. Next thing you know, it'll be telling us not to drive if we want to pee, and not to even so much as think of getting in the car if we haven't had sex for a while. I'm not kidding. New research in Australia has shown that 42% of drivers over there have dangerous sexual fantasies while behind the wheel. It goes on. We need to break the belief many drivers hold that they can automatically be safely in charge of a vehicle, irrespective of what they're thinking about. I see, so now I face winding up in court charged with driving while under the influence of Kristen Scott Thomas. Your Honour, I couldn't help it. I was just thinking about the English patient and she just popped into my head. I'm sorry. I'll be sure to have some bromide before I drive next time. Only not too much in case I need a pee. Having been born white, I've no idea what it's like to be victimised for no good reason. But as a motorist in Blair's Britain, I suspect I'm about to find out. Born to be Riled was written and read by me, Jeremy Clarkson, and is published by BBC Worldwide. Travel Tips with Jezza Chalmers. If you were to be wrongly charged with murder while in Thailand, I think it fair to assume that you wouldn't conduct your own defence. You don't speak Thai and you don't understand the nuances of their legal system. And yet, when we go abroad on holiday, we're all quite happy to pile into a rental car, even though we can't read the signposts, we don't understand the customs, and, more often than not, everyone is on the wrong side of the road. I mean, in Britain, if someone flashes their lights, it means they're waving you through, but elsewhere it means, look out, I'm not going to stop. However, you won't realise this until you're halfway through your windscreen. So, what I've attempted to do in the limited space here is try to offer some advice for those who will be driving abroad this summer. Let's start in America, just outside Miami Airport, where the slip road joins the Florida Turnpike. You've been rammed gently from behind and you've climbed out to inspect the damage. This was a mistake because the man who ran into your rear end is a Colombian drug dealer who will now shoot you, your wife and your children. Then he'll help himself to all your belongings. Locals say that if you're rammed you should drive around until you see a policeman, but this is not sensible either. You see, if Plod is confronted with a hysterical limey babbling away in an accent he doesn't really understand, he will shoot you so he can get back to his 7th donut of the morning. It is possible just to get out of the Miami district without being murdered, but then you face an altogether new problem. The road may be wide and straight, but do not, however tempting it might be, exceed 70 miles an hour. Your American rental car is simply not capable of high-speed travel and will, if you push it, bounce off the road into a swamp, whereupon you will be eaten by an alligator. Other tips. You must pay for fuel before filling your tank, which is stupid because you have no idea how much your tank will take. Nevertheless, don't try to argue or buck the system because most petrol pump attendants in Florida are daft and armed, a lethal combination which will result in you springing a leak. It's also worth remembering that in America most establishments have valets with massive teeth and idiotic red waistcoats who will volunteer to park your car. When they return it, they will expect a tip, but you can get round this by pretending to be Icelandic. Whatever you do, do not claim to be Romanian or Czechoslovakian because he will think you're a commie and may try to shoot you. The best piece of advice I can give to anyone thinking of driving in America this year is, have you thought about Europe? Italy is perfect, but be aware that your rental car will be a wreck with a shagged engine. This will make any foray into the Autostrada's overtaking lane tantamount to dancing with the devil. In Italy, they don't wait patiently for slower cars to move over, nor do they flash their lights or attempt to get past on the inside. They just ram you. Life is a lot more disciplined in Germany, of course, but I can't think of a single reason why you would want to go on holiday there. France is much nicer, but whatever happens, do not take your own car across the channel. There is something called ferry psychology, which means that as you approach Calais to come home, you will definitely be driving too fast. This is either because you are late for the sailing on which you're booked, or you're miles too early, in which case you're hurrying to catch an earlier boat. Either way, you'll be caught speeding and made to pay a fine so massive that when you get home, your house will have been repossessed. And don't try claiming that you can't pay, because then they will take your car and your wife out to dinner, where she will fall for their Gallic charm and leave you to a life of mess and shop doorways. The most popular foreign destination for British tourists is Spain, which is one of those strange facts that I can never understand. Like, why is the motorway central reservation always littered with shoes? I really don't like Spain, but I will admit that their roads these days are simply superb. Smooth, wide, fast, and free in large chunks from too much in the way of traffic. If you've ever wondered where the EU spends all its money, have a look at Barcelona's motorway network, and then get out there and enjoy it. You paid for it. Briefly, because I'm running out of space here, I should warn you that wildlife is a massive problem elsewhere in the world. In Britain, we are unused to rounding a bend to find the road blocked by half a ton of snorting mussel. But in Australia, camels and kangaroos regularly play chicken. In India it's cows, and in Sweden even more people are killed by errant elks than by razor blades and mogodon. In the Caribbean, mercifully, large animals are scarce, but then the cars they rent you would lose if they went head-to-head against a breeze. In Barbados, be very careful indeed to avoid what is basically a Suzuki Alto with no bodywork at all. In fact, it's probably best to avoid going abroad in the first place. Me, I'm off to the Isle of Man for some fresh air, some invigorating scenery, and the joy of being able to drive through it without the burden of speed limits. Noel's Le Mans party blows a fuse. Last week I went to Le Mans, where for the first time I was introduced formally to the world of big-time motor racing, and I've worked something out. We tend to think of motor racing as being a driver thing, but this, I'm sorry to say, is not really the case. Yes, his hairstyle looks good and his teeth are shiny, but it's the car that matters most of all. In a Williams, Damon Hill was world champion. In an Arrows, he is an amusing sideshow. Think of it in terms of cooking. Give me the freshest ingredients and I'll knock up a supper that will cause your taste buds to die of a broken heart. Give Gary Rhodes a tin of pilchards and you'll get a tin of pilchards. At Le Mans, I was part of the panels team that had been put together by His Noeliness, Mr. Edmonds, and for 5 days I hung around in their pit wearing a serious expression and pointing at things. It all began on Wednesday evening when the cars were sent out to qualify, nail-biting stuff, because the 2 slowest entries would not be allowed to race. A year's work would be bundled onto the back of a lorry and sent home. On his first lap, one of our drivers, Andy Wallace, reported over the ship-to-shore radio that his Panos was absolutely effing undrivable. Under braking, it was bouncing all over the track, but worse than that, the 6-litre V8 Ford engine had no power coming out of the corners. The news was bad, but the other car was in even worse shape. Its oil repository had seemingly been modelled on a colander. So, as the session was terminated at 12:30, it seemed likely that neither of our cars would make the grade. We had one more chance on Thursday night to make those cars fly. That morning I asked by far and away our tweediest driver, James Weaver, to explain the problem, expecting him to lift the bonnet and point at a wonky part. But no! I was taken into a back room where men in spectacles were hunched over a bank of laptops, staring at the graphs. "There," he said. I peered at the readouts for some time, my face scrunched up like I was trying to read a sign from a long way away, but could make neither head nor tail of it. So he explained that the blue wheel speed trace did not match the red rev trace, that there was a glitch, and that the men in spectacles were interrogating the engine's electronic management system to find out why. I'd noticed this the day before. Whenever the car came back to the pits, no one ever went near the engine. They simply plugged computers into it and banged away at keyboards in a Rick Wakeman-esque frenzy. And they kept on banging away all through Thursday and all through the vital evening practice session, and still the engine wouldn't work properly. The mechanics had sorted the handling problems and the drivers were giving it their absolute best, but none of this really mattered because somewhere deep in the bowels of that multi-million-dollar carbon fibre race car there was a morsel of silicon having a genetic tantrum. Right at the end of the second practice session, one of our cars had made it, just, but the other faced being eliminated by the number 50 car from Lotus, which was out there, on the track, doing its stuff. It's funny, but for 3.5 minutes, one lap of Le Mans, my whole life was focused on the timing screen, waiting for that Lotus to finish its do-or-die run. Every second seemed like an hour, because every second was an hour. Lotus would have been better off with an Orion diesel. I celebrated by goose-stepping through the Porsche pit, which was considered poor form. But still, those men in specs pumped away at their laptops, desperately trying to turn our engine from Allard Jones into Pavarotti. They were monitoring everything as the race began, but even so, just 2 hours down the line, one of our cars ran out of juice. The driver got it back to the pits using the starter motor, but this technique wore out the battery, which had to be replaced, costing even more time. The mechanics worked like ants, the drivers gave it their best shot, and everyone agreed that the British-designed chassis was superb. But at 3 a.m. the engine on one car blew up and it was out. The other engine gave up the ghost 7 hours later. So what have I learned then? Well, if our cars had been equipped with a bank of Holly carburettors instead of stupid electronic fuel injection, there's a better than evens chance both would have finished. When a carburettor goes wrong, and they almost never do, you rip it off and fit a new one. It costs a tenner and takes about 5 minutes. But when an electronic pulse goes bonkers, even Bill Gates would be flummoxed. In motor racing, you need an engine that can shovel fuel into the cylinders, a hot chassis, and a team of mechanics who'll build the parts properly. A driver whose eyes work is not a bad idea either. We had all that. But computer geeks have now shambled into this high-octane world, and I just don't know why. They have a place, of course, but it should be in a loft somewhere, searching the internet for photographs of naked ladies. Corvette lacks the right stuff. So, underachiever, how do you feel today? Let me guess, you got up, went to work, flirted with the secretaries, came home and watched telly. Now, Newsnight is on and you're reading this, yawning and wondering why you've got nipples. It's okay, I do pretty much the same sort of thing most days, and that's why I know Hoot Gibson will gall you as much as he galled me. Here is an all-American dude with Paul Newman eyes who learned his art in Vietnam, flying F-4 Phantoms and shooting down MiGs which may or may not have been piloted by top-flight Russians. He was so adept at blowing things out of the sky they sent him to the Top Gun Academy, where he became a better instructor than Kelly McGillis. And after that he found himself stationed at Pax River, flying all the new experimental fast jets. When his Navy flying career was over, instead of a desk, the services gave him a space shuttle, something he's used to visit space on no fewer than 5 occasions. So what then does Mr. All-American Hero choose to drive when he's back on Texan Earth and restricted to 55 miles an hour? A Viper? A Jag? A Bimmer? No. Mr. Gibson has a Toyota Camry, finished in aubergine with a matching interior. I pointed out that this was a terrible car, and he agreed, but said it was at least reliable, something he said that's important to me. OK, I can understand that, but in The Right Stuff, the best book in the world, incidentally, Tom Wolfe says that all the early test pilots and astronauts hurtled into town in Corvettes, the first American sports car. Why, I suggested, do you not have one of those? Because, he said, it's a piece of junk. Whoa there, boy, Mr. Pumping Pecs, calling his auto-equivalent junk? This needed exploring, and so, 2 days later, in Nevada, I hired myself an egg-yellow convertible with a slushmatic box. I slithered elegantly into the vibrantly shiny cockpit, the 5.7-litre V8 burbled into life, and the sleek nose edged its way onto Las Vegas Boulevard. I felt good. The Corvette is dangerously handsome, and my views on US V8s are well documented. The steering was quick, the stereo was sound, and I began to suspect Hoot should stick to sounding off about planes. But then I ran over a piece of chewing gum. Jesus H. Christ. Did you know the Vet has no suspension travel at all? The wheels are connected directly to your buttocks. I suspected that there was something wrong with it, and then, that night, it broke down altogether. But the red replacement was just as bad. OK, I'll let you in on a secret. The Corvette is a slow motor car which does not handle at all. Because there's no suspension to absorb the roll, this car just slides, which must be why it has traction control. But this comes in so viciously and so early that I decided to turn it off, and whoops, eek and way, guys and gals, we're going backwards. It was fun, right up to the moment when I saw the guardrail approaching. Here's another secret. Anti-lock brakes don't work when you're going sideways. But it was okay, I ground to a halt with a good 5 inches to spare. I was doing that post-trauma bit where you breathe out and lower your shoulders by 5 yards when an officer of the law arrived. The guy knew his cars, and pretty quickly conversation turned to the Corvette that had nearly killed me. "You know the big problem with the Vet," he said. "It's the worst goddamn car in the whole world. He hadn't actually seen my spin, but said he wouldn't even think of writing out a ticket for speeding because he knows just how easy it is to lose control of Detroit's biggest balls-up. "Goddamn vet spins so easy you can park one outside a store. When you come out, it'll be facing the other way," he added. As he climbed back into his cruiser, he gave me some advice. "Tonight, leave the roof down, the keys in. With a bit of luck, someone will steal it." I've always liked the Corvette and once toyed with the idea of buying one. But I'm better now. It's simple, really. The Americans are good at space shuttles, and we're good at cars. Freemasons need coning off. I've just driven from Milan to Avignon via Pisa, Bologna and Monte Carlo, and in not one of the 1,500 miles did I see a single motorway lane closure. There were no roadworks at all. There were no cones. It was a high-speed highway to heaven. Even though the Lancia Dedra estate I'd rented was terminally backward and any assault on the car's upper rev limit caused my ears to explode, I could do 90 for hour after hour after hour. On one downhill stretch I hit 100, but the doors fell off. Then I came back to England, where on the simple 85-mile journey from Gatwick to Oxford there were 3 major sets of roadworks. Now the M25 I can understand. They screwed up and built it too narrow. Fine. God made a mess, remember, when he did the flamingo, which is an idiotic bird with legs that are far too long. Then he did the totally purposeless nettle. We all make mistakes. So, ever since the M25 opened, they've been widening it. Then there's the roadworks on the M40, which again are understandable. The road has worn out and needs replacing. Mind you, I don't understand how they intend to do this by coning off the offending few miles and employing guys in hard hats to stare at it. I've driven down the single lane they've left a lot recently, and I've yet to see a single person doing anything. Still, they're experienced roadwork Johnnies, so we can rest assured that they know what they're doing. But I do not understand what is going on where the M40 meets the M25. The signs say it's being widened, which is nonsense. It was already wide enough by miles. The M6 needs widening, the M5 needs widening, the M1 needs widening. But they've decided that none of these real problems will be addressed until they've had some practice on the underused M40. And boy, are they going to take their time. 2 years to be precise. Now look, a road is some stones covered with sticky stuff that sets. In 2 years, I could build a road from here to Sofia. In 2 years, they could close the M40, plant crops, allow them to grow, harvest them, and then build a new motorway. And there'd still be time to stand around in hard hats pointing at things. When an earthquake devastated Los Angeles, I don't recall signs saying the freeways would be open again in 2 years. No, I saw teams of worker bees shoveling ruined bridges away and building new ones, so the entire network was up and running again in less than 12 months. In Japan, once I saw them replace an entire Tokyo highway before sunup. Now, at this point, some people will be reaching for the notepaper, eager to point out that we don't pay tolls to use our motorways and that we can't expect better service as a result. Well, that's crap. Britain's motorists pay £25 billion a year through vehicle excise duty and petrol tax and car tax and VAT on tax and so on and so forth. That's a lot of money. In fact, we're paying so much the government simply doesn't know what to do with it all. This can surely be the only reason why they're spending 2 years widening an already wide road. Either that or it's the bloody Freemasons again. In the past, I've blamed Freemasonry for the destruction of our car industry, arguing that a component buyer from BL wouldn't fire a company for sending dodgy parts if its managing director had a weird handshake. Week in and week out, lorry loads of crappy Speedos or whatever were delivered, and no one did a damn thing about it because of some barbaric ceremony every Tuesday night where a bunch of grown men run around throwing salt at one another. Well, now they're at it in the construction industry, taking 10 times too long to do a job that didn't need doing anyway, in exchange for a new apron and an oddball boater. Britain stands no chance of becoming a driving force in Europe unless we build roads properly and get urgent repairs done quickly. I suspect things will be better under Call Me Tony. He's a village idiot and his backbenchers are teachers with beards, but they haven't yet been exposed to white-collar Britain. So when Mr. Motorway Builder walks in and shakes hands while doing a handstand, they will ask him to leave, or they will call security. Sad old Surrey. Careful and studious readers may know that A. A. Gill is being hauled in front of the Commission for Racial Equality after describing the Welsh as being pugnacious little trolls. Well, though we write for the same newspaper, I wish to distance myself from these attacks. Wales is a pretty and charming part of the country, and the Welsh have a rounded range of abilities, singing and setting fire to things. I think if we're going to single out a part of Britain for ridicule and hatred, Wales comes a very distant second to that jumped-up lump of suburbia called Surrey. If I may be permitted to liken the British Isles to a beautiful woman, Surrey is her most stubborn dingleberry. In the last 3 years, I've travelled to many countries and seen traffic to frustrate even the most dedicated petrolhead. But on Monday morning, Guildford made Tokyo look like the Brecon Beacons. To get from one side to the other took 2 hours at an average speed of 6 miles an hour. All around, people were sitting in their horrid neo-Georgian houses, congratulating themselves for having moved out of London to the country, obviously unaware that they have not left London at all. They're as much a part of the metropolitan sprawl as Tottenham. Except that in London, if a main thoroughfare is full, locals can use any number of rabbit runs, whereas in Surrey, this is not possible. Sure, there are a few open spaces, and given Surreyman's tendency to drive a large four-wheel drive car, none would present much of a problem technically speaking. But to drive off-road in Surrey is to invite a confrontation with one of its rangers. Now, a friend of mine once signed on at the Kensington Dole office saying he was a shepherd, and I dare say an investment banker would find life hard in Swaledale. But a ranger in Surrey? Why? What they do, apparently, is drive around the much quaffered heathland in Land Rovers, telling other people in Land Rovers not to drive off-road and to get back to central London where they belong. So everyone sits on the roads, not moving for hour after hour after hour. Every Laburnum Close and Orchid Drive is full, every B Road is full, every dual carriageway is full, and there's no way in hell that Fatty Prescott is going to get this lot onto one of his buses. For these people, image is everything. They won't even admit to living in Surrey, saying instead they live on the Surrey-Hampshire borders, or for those in the know that they live in GU4, which, the postman will tell you, is a ritzy suburb called Shalford. Here I saw mothers depositing their children at school from cars that were several miles long. One had an American off-roader that was easily bigger than an Intercity 125. Why should she use a train when she's already got one? And these people don't park their cars neatly outside the school gates. They simply abandon them nearby and stand around with the other mothers who've abandoned their space shuttles and coaches, arranging bloody coffee mornings. Actually, I can't make it today. I'm having sex with the gardener. That, of course, is after the gardener in question has helped the ranger chop down a few more trees. Trees need to be murdered here because to convince themselves that Surrey is not simply London SW37, the locals demand that the open spaces be kept as such. They call them beauty spots, and that's exactly what they are, spots. Tiny little pinpricks of manicured green in a sea of fake marble pillars and Mitsubishi Shoguns. When the rush hour has subsided and Surrey woman is at home watching the gardener pant over her panties, old people come out of their houses and climb into their Chevettes and Rover 600s and head for the hills, where the ranger has ripped up some more trees to make car parks. I spent 2 days in such a car park this week and have rarely felt so depressed. The view was undoubtedly pretty, but you know that it's stage managed and that just over the next hill lies Esher, which isn't pretty at all. And you know that you mustn't let your dog off its lead or pick a flower. This is countryside in the same way that the Spice Girls is a rock band, i.e. it isn't countryside at all. If it were cheese, it would be Primula. And the visitors know it. They sit in their cars, not daring to get out in case they break one of the ranger's rules, and they stare at that pitiful facsimile of nature for hours on end. They don't talk, they don't eat, they don't read. They're sitting in a bloody car park surrounded by hundreds of other people in cars, listening to lorries lumbering up the A25, watching a tree being chopped down by nature conservationists. One man turned up in a brand new Bentley Turbo R and sat in his car facing not the view, but the cafe which sells chips. And the staff there explained that Paul Weller is a regular visitor. Small wonder the poor bloke has such a strange view of the world when he's forced to sit in a traffic jam for 2 hours just to get one. Surrey is more awful, I suspect, than hell. If that's the future for commuting, then my God, you can have my keys right now. Top Gear in the dock. The nanny state sank its claws into Top Gear this week, and now, according to the tabloid newspapers, I'm to be probed by TV watchdogs. It seems that a cyclist called Tony Collins, who's a road safety officer with Exeter City Council, has complained to the Broadcasting Standards Commission that Top Gear is responsible for 25 million deaths, and that the asteroid heading our way is somehow my fault too. He says that I recently drove a Mercedes-Benz at 70 miles an hour and that my colleagues are to be heard whooping with joy as they accelerate past 150 on private airfields and racetracks. We're louts, the lot of us. Obviously, he isn't affected by what we say or do because he is a supreme being. But he is worried that an ordinary weak person who is not a road safety officer with Exeter City Council will be tempted when the show is over to perform a handbrake turn on his neighbour's lawn. Well now, I've thought about this for the last 15 minutes or so, and I reckon Mr. Collins is a little wider than Mark. You see, the first 2 words my 2-year-old son ever strung together were car and crash, and he's never seen Top Gear in his life. Show him a Morris Minor and he will not be terribly interested, but stand him in front of the television when a Grand Prix is in full flood and he will wet himself with excitement, literally. There are a great many men, and I'm happy to say a few women too, who enjoy the thrill that can only be provided by a big, fast, powerful car. Some are drawn by the excellence of its engineering and some by the cleverness of its design. And then there are about 90 million others who tune into Top Gear every week to find out what that car would feel like flat out at 200 miles an hour. Yesterday I drove to Wales in a Citroën XM, which is the automotive equivalent of a beige cardigan. Unsurprisingly, I was ignored. But once in Wales, I drove a Jaguar XJ220, which is 16 feet long, 7 feet wide, and does 217 miles an hour. This is more of a snazzy waistcoat, and boy did it stop the traffic. Obviously those with beards and bicycles and mealy mouths asked mockingly how many miles it did to the gallon and how much it would cost to insure, but the vast majority wanted to know the same thing. How fast does it go? Speed has an appeal. I've driven a car at 186 miles an hour and I loved it. I've flown a jet at 700 miles an hour and I was sick, but I loved that too. I've been at 150 miles an hour on water and I'd do it again, tomorrow. Does this make me a lout? I don't think so. I don't even think it makes me unusual. But with T-bone steaks and hedges gone and smoking in pubs about to go too, there is a possibility that all references to performance could be purged from Top Gear. We could go back, as Mr. Collins wants, to talking about boot sills and seat upholstery design, and then the fields would once again fill with wild flowers and women in beekeeper hats. But would this make the roads any safer? If I'm no longer allowed to bark like a dog when the latest Ferrari turns out to be tested, does it mean that young men with unusual haircuts will suddenly feel a need to stop driving quickly and start reading E.M. Forster novels? If Mr. Collins thinks so, then perhaps he should get out more. The last 9/11 is full of hot air. Reviewing music has to be the hardest, most pointless job since Twinkle-Toe Winkle-Toe Fines walked to the North Pole wearing nothing but a dressing gown and slippers or something. Imagine, please, being instructed to write about the latest All Saints album. You'd listen, hate it, and say so. And a week later, all the 14-year-olds who took it to number 1 would burn your house down. I could sit my mother in front of the stereo and play her Life Through a Lens by Robbie Williams, and she'd look like someone was using a staple gun on her nose. Ask me to listen to Joni Mitchell and I have to put my fingers in my ears and sing Bar Bar Black Sheep at the top of my voice. Tell me to review one of her albums and I'd say it was like chewing on polystyrene. Cars are so much simpler. They're either fast or slow, spacious or cramped, expensive or not so expensive. And reviewing them is a black and white science, right up to the moment when you surge past, say, £60,000. At this point, you're not buying a car for practical reasons. You're buying a brand that you've dreamed about since you were 2. And it really doesn't matter if the brand in question has, in the meantime, become a joke. For some reason, the name Bristol has just sprung to mind, and here comes another one. Maserati. And then there's the Porsche 911, which of course is emphatically not a joke. I've just spent a week with the very last of the old air-cooled monsters, and it failed to raise a smile even once. A bit like Rory Bremner's BAFTA presentation last weekend. Now, for some, the passing of the old 911 is right up there with the passing of Princess Diana. I have seen people weeping in the streets and threatening to hurl themselves off a tall building unless Porsche bring it back. I, however, couldn't care less, because at 2 I dreamed about Ferraris, and in the playground I would fight people from Planet Porsche. I would push their heads down lavatories until they admitted the 911 was smelly. Say it, or I'll give you a Chinese burn. And as a result, I now find it rather difficult to review this, the last of the breed, sensibly. I can tell you it's got a twin-turbocharged 3.6-litre engine which develops 450 brake horsepower. I can tell you that only 33 examples of this so-called Turbo S have been made and all are sold. I can tell you too that this car is supposed to be the ultimate 911, that it brings together everything Porsche has learned from 35 years' practice. These are the facts, and now here come the opinions. It is, without doubt, the scariest, nastiest, ugliest piece of donkey dirt that has ever graced my drive. The only possible way you could have fun with this car is by dropping a lighted match into the petrol tank. On the motorway, the ride is so firm it blurs your vision, and in town the ground clearance is such that some of the more vigorous speed bumps in the Socialist Republic of Hammersmith and Fulham brought it to a dead halt. Sure, the technologically sophisticated four-wheel drive system would enable the Porsche to keep going in a ploughed field, but not with that nose. It's so low it snorts the white lines off the road. Then you've got a mixed bag of turbo lag, fearsome acceleration and brakes which inspire no confidence at all. Hit them gently and nothing happens. Hit them hard and your nose slams into the windscreen, which is too close at the best of times. You don't so much as look through it as wear it, like a pair of spectacles. I truly hated this car, and am glad it's no longer in production. Indeed, I believe that the devil himself would drive such a thing. So I was horrified to hear a man from Porsche say the other day that so long as there is a Ferrari, there will be a Porsche Turbo, which means that in the year 2000 we can expect a blown version of the new 911, a car I quite like as it is. Anyhow, that's then and this is now, and I'm still stuck trying to review a car that's about as much use as a CB radio in a Vodafone world. So, in the interests of balanced journalism, I managed to find a 5-minute gap in the Marquis of Blandford's diary when he actually had a driving licence, and asked him to have a go. He is a huge 911 fan and approached the egg-yellow monstrosity as though it were the Turin Shroud. To drive the last of the air-cooled 911s, he whispered, is a real privilege. 1 hour later he was back, beaming the smile of a man who'd been taken a little closer to godhood. You've got to understand a 911's little foibles, he said. If you really understand these cars, you will know that this is just the best of them all. He's sitting behind me now, tied to the chair with a bar of soap in his mouth, and I won't let him go until he stops calling my Ferrari a Fiat and admits the worst car in the world is not, as we'd suspected, the Vauxhall Vectra. Elk test makes monkeys of us. Imagine the horror. You're a cameraman with the BBC's Natural History Department, and you've been dispatched to Tierra del Fuego in South America, where once every 10 years a strange frog comes out of the mud, mates, and then dies. You've been sitting there for the best part of a decade when the need for a crap becomes utterly overwhelming. So you scoop up the bog roll, a copy of Viz, and disappear behind a rock. And while you're gone, Froggy comes out of his muddy home and struts his stuff with Mrs. Frog. Well, last month, Britain's motoring journalists were on the bog while all hell was breaking loose. Some had driven the Mercedes A-Class and glowing reports were appearing in magazines all over the land. Autocar said it could dive through tight bends with agility. Car magazines said much the same thing, while Auto Express praised its responsive chassis. Now, I don't want to sound smug about this, but after half a mile in the new baby Benz, it became very obvious that its handling was not agile, and it certainly wasn't responsive. It was utterly and completely crap. Contrary to what many may think, we road testers do get swayed by the opinions of colleagues, and I found myself in a quandary. Here was a car from one of the world's most ruthlessly efficient manufacturer, a car that my colleagues liked very much. It takes a very special kind of bombastic arrogance to be that little boy in the Emperor's new clothes, to stand up and say, actually, its handling is appalling. But thank God I did, because just a week later, a Swedish magazine found to its cost that while performing what's become known as the elk test, the A-Class rolled over and put its occupants in hospital. A German mag then repeated the procedure, and subsequent examination of the film showed that what we had here was A-Class 1 disaster. Experts immediately dismissed the elk test as unrepresentative, but I disagree. Swerving one way then the other to miss an obstacle is worthwhile in any environment. Sure, we don't have elks in Britain, but we do have children and dogs and debris in the outside lane of the motorway. And Mercedes agreed, because first they said they'd change the tyres, then they said the stability control would be fitted as standard, then they stopped the production lines. The fact is, Mercedes screwed up, and our journos missed the biggest story since the Ford Pinto. Well, now it's time to wake up and smell the coffee. Drive an A-Class into a roundabout at a sporty rather than aggressive pace, and the understeer is colossal. Switch direction and massive body roll attaches itself like a 2-ton barnacle to a problem that shouldn't have been there in the first place. It's impossible to miss. I only feel guilty that I majored on the car's good points, but at least I spotted the flaw. In the early days of car journalism, it was important to be on the ball because rotten and dangerous cars lumbered onto the market every week. But in recent years, the whole game has shifted. We assume a car is safe and reliable and make our judgments instead on what the badge says about the driver, value for money, and so on. Sure, not many magazines can afford to do crash testing like car companies do, but most have forgotten how to do any testing at all, other than zooming up and down with stopwatches. Thank God, a little Swedish mag still does things properly. Everyone else took it for granted that the A-Class would be safe and steady, and talked instead about the space inside and the fact that you could park a 3-pointed star on your driveway for just £14,000. No one actually stopped to think, hold on, this is Mercedes' first ever attempt at a front-wheel drive car. Let's assume nothing. Let's do a lane change manoeuvre. Let's wiggle the wheel a bit to see what's what. It doesn't matter what Mercedes do with the design of their car now. The A-Class is dead, and with it has gone the reputation of Britain's motoring journalists. We should all be sent to Iraq, but I fear that as the F-15s sweep in from Turkey to post bombs through Saddam's letterbox, we'd all be on the beach, filing copy about fine wines and nice cheese. Hell below decks. As I see it, there are 3 possibilities after death. Heaven, which should be very nice, nothingness, which will be just like sleep, or hell, which no longer concerns me. I don't care what foul vat of sewage has been dreamed up by Lucifer, because it cannot possibly be any worse than life on board an American aircraft carrier. As you were heading for work on Monday morning, I was on board what looked like a winged washing machine, outbound from Norfolk, Virginia to the nuclear-powered 100,000-ton USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the biggest, fastest warship the world has ever seen. Now, I've talked before on these pages about the braking ability of a Porsche Turbo, which goes from 70 to 0 in 2.8 seconds. But that's nothing. My plane, which was called a cod and flew like one, hit the deck at 175 miles an hour and was stationary 2 seconds later. Picking bits of spleen from the inside of my float coat, a loud and hectoring sailor ushered me from what he called the most dangerous place on earth, the flight deck of a carrier, into what I now know to be the worst place on earth, the bowels of a carrier. A crew of 5,000 lived down there, spread over 17 decks, which are interconnected by 17 miles of corridor, 66 ladders, and 1,000 watertight doors on which you bang your head. There are no open spaces where you can sit and chill out. You aren't allowed to have sex with the 500 women. Everything is fashioned from steel, and there are no windows. Then there's the total lack of privacy even when you're on the lavatory, and the constant, deafening noise, 24 hours a day for month after interminable month. To get even the slightest idea what life is like for these sailors, imagine being locked into the back of a steel container and driven around on the back of an articulated lorry for 6 months. For company, you have 2 8-year-olds, one of whom is learning the recorder and the other a violin. Then there are 30 young men with spots who shout at one another all day and all night, and, for good measure, one bloke who follows you around blowing a hairdryer in your face. On the Eisenhower, I was allocated a guide who walked like Herman Munster and talked like Barney Rubble. He was not a bright man. If I asked him a question, he would repeat it very slowly, and then, before answering in Navy gobbledygook, say, "Now let's see." On the second day, the ship's tannoy announced that an F-18 had suffered an engine fire and was limping back to the carrier on just one of its General Electric turbofans. Barney, however, couldn't care less, because I'd just given him $10 to settle an $8 bill, and this was confusing the hell out of him. "Now, let's see," he said. It all ended well, though, and a booming voice rose above the violin practice to say the plane had landed safely, and that everyone on the ship, including Barney, I presume, had done an outstanding job. This happens a lot. At 4 a.m, you'll be woken by the booming tannoy. "Someone you have never met has done something you don't care about in a part of the ship that you will never go to. Outstanding job." All I wanted was a drink and a cigarette, but there was one small hurdle that stood in the way. My fish washing machine had to be attached to a steam catapult and hurled over the front of the ship. Now, this catapult is quite a thing. If it could be angled properly, it would throw a Volkswagen Beetle 12 miles. But it was not angled, and my cod weighed much more than a car. I just knew it would flop into the sea and tumble end over end under the ship until it reached the stern, where the 4 30-foot propellers would shred it and me into bite-sized chunks. Here's what happens. They attach the front wheel of your plane to what looks like a half-brick, which is then fired down 100 yards of track by a steam-powered piston. At the far end, the wheel detaches itself and, hey presto, you're airborne. So, in 100 yards and just 1.5 seconds, I would accelerate from 0 to 175 miles an hour. And at long last, we have a motoring flavour here. Apparently, there was some discussion at the very highest levels within BMW about the new M5. Burnt Fish Trousers himself was quoted recently as saying that there's only a small gap between the current 540i and the physical limits of acceleration. The BM boffins were seriously concerned that they'd expend a great deal of time, energy and money designing an M5 which in the end would not be that much faster than a standard 540. But I'm delighted to say that they went ahead anyway, and really, they needn't have worried about this acceleration business. Even if the new 400 brake horsepower car does 0 to 60 in a single second, which it won't, it'll still be nothing compared to the power delivered by that steam catapult. Only by stepping into the path of an intercity train could you have even the vaguest inkling of what it's like. You die, of course, but don't worry. That's much, much better than having to spend time on a carrier. Believe you me.